The Great Pyramid, this grand and magnificent structure, has captured the curiosity and imagination of man for centuries. How old is it? Who built it? And why was it built? Travel back through epochs of time as we walk its unusual passageways and examine its unique chambers. Watch and marvel at the wonder of how its architect created this parable in stone. Now come with us to see the mysteries unfold that are hidden in this Great Pyramid of Giza.
The ancient world was famous for its 7 wonders. But today, the phrase itself is much better known than the actual wonders. Let's look at the first wonder. Here's an artist's conception of the statue of Zeus. It was constructed in 450 BC. None of it survives to our day. The second wonder was the Colossus on the Greek island of Rhodes. It was built in 280 BC and stood just 56 years before it was destroyed by an earthquake. The third wonder was the Temple of Diana at Ephesus. A part of one column survives in the British Museum. The fourth ancient wonder was the tomb of King Mausolus at Halicarnassus, built in 400 BC. Pieces of it survive in the British Museum. The Hanging Gardens of Babylon were terraced gardens on an artificial mountain maintained by pumped water. They lasted less than 100 years. The lighthouse at Alexandria was the sixth wonder. None of it survives. The seventh wonder surpasses all the others in every way. It is by far the greatest and most ancient of them all, the Great Pyramid at Giza. This huge structure is so old, it was standing for 1,700 years before any other wonder appeared on Earth. How old is it? The best estimate places its construction at 2170 BC. If this date is correct, it had been standing for 600 years when Moses received the 10 Commandments from God, when none of the Old Testament had yet been written. The Great Pyramid is almost 500 feet high and covers 13 acres. It is more massive than any other pyramid in the world. We still don't know how the Egyptians could construct such a structure. Some of its stones weigh 70 tons. They've been cut and placed so expertly, in places there's almost no mortar between the blocks. The penknife shows the meeting point of 2 huge blocks. Its size alone guaranteed it would survive anything. Students of this pyramid have been intrigued not only by its sheer mass, but by its intricate system of passages and chambers. No other pyramid in the world even approaches the interior complexity of the Great Pyramid. There have been many guesses about why the Great Pyramid was built. Many people think it was built as a tomb for a powerful Egyptian king. Others say it was used to geometrically determine land divisions after the annual flooding of the Nile. A third theory says it was a kind of astronomical observatory while the upward-pointing passages were still exposed to the sky. But one theory has greater evidence to support its claim than all the others. That theory suggests that the Great Pyramid is a God-given parable in stone, illustrating God's plan for man, covering the past, present, and future. Notice how the prophet Isaiah referred to the Great Pyramid as the symbolic parable of God's purposes. In that day shall there be an altar to the Lord in the midst of the land of Egypt, and it shall be for a sign and for a witness unto the Lord of hosts in the land of Egypt. The phrase altar to the Lord is very significant. Although altars were usually used for sacrifices, they were also constructed as monuments with their inscriptions often containing important information and events. When Isaiah wrote those words, altars were constructed by placing stones one on top of another. The analogy becomes apparent. The Great Pyramid is the altar or monument designed by God as a memorial to himself and his plan. He has given us this massive stone monument which, as we will see, pictorially corroborates his written testimony. There is a common thread throughout all religions. Every religion attempts to explain where we came from, why we're here, and where we're going. Christianity supplies answers to these same questions. The Bible tells us man arrived on this planet by the direct creation of God. According to the dates in the Bible, that first man, called Adam, was created over 4,100 years before Christ. Adam was told he would live as long as he obeyed his Creator. But instead of obeying, he disobeyed and plunged himself and his future race into a life of sin, sickness, and death. This fall from perfection reached such a degree of wickedness that God thought it best to destroy nearly the entire human race in a great flood of waters. The flood occurred almost 1,700 years after the creation of Adam. According to pyramid scholars, the construction of the Great Pyramid took place about 300 years after the flood. For over 1,800 years, God dealt exclusively with the nation of Israel as his chosen people. But, like the rest of mankind, Israel could not keep God's perfect laws. A sinful and dying race could not rescue itself. It required the sacrifice of a perfect man to ransom the first perfect man, Adam, from the condemnation of justice. That perfect man was Jesus, the Son of God, who became a man and died to redeem mankind. The reward Jesus received for obeying the will of his heavenly Father was divine life, the highest form of life in the universe. The past 2,000 years since Christ has been the age of Christianity. During this age, only those called by God to a life of sacrifice are in special relationship to him. Those who obey God and sacrifice their own interests receive life of a very special kind, a life in heaven. The remainder of mankind, those not in special relationship with God, will be resurrected back to earth. This is shown in the words of Jesus when he taught his disciples to pray, "Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, in earth." Resurrected mankind, like Adam, will be tested to see if they will obey the instruction they receive from God. Those who obey will live forever on the earth. Those who disobey will die, never to live again. When Jesus was on earth, mankind received information about God's plan. We have his description of God's plan in the Bible. God also recorded this same plan in the stones of the Great Pyramid, more than 2,000 years before any part of our Bible was written. Let's go on now to see how the Great Pyramid symbolically portrays God's plan for man. Today, there are two entrances to the pyramid, both on the north face. The arrow points to the original entrance, which was cleverly concealed under outer casing stones. In the 9th century, an Arab caliph named Al-Mamun forced his way into the pyramid, seeking the riches usually buried with ancient Egyptian kings. His forced entrance, lower and to the right of the original entrance, is shown here. Although he did find his way into the pyramid's passages and chambers, there was no fortune anywhere. Egyptian authorities have sealed the original entry. The forced passage of Al-Mamun is the only way in. Electric lights and handrails have been installed to make it easier to visit the interior of this monumental structure. The entrance passage into the pyramid is called the Descending Passage. It measures just 4 feet high and 3.5 feet wide, making it very difficult to walk in it. The Descending Passage actually leaves the pyramid superstructure and continues down through the foundation rock. It levels out for a short distance, then terminates in an unfinished room called the Pit. The walls and ceiling of this room are smooth, but the floor is rough and unfinished. It's almost as though we were meant to see it as a bottomless pit. We believe this passage and unfinished room, like everything in this pyramid, conveys a symbolic message. In humanity's experience, we have seen a downward descent, starting with the creation of perfect beings, but ending in a pit of sin and death. There appears to be no way to escape this final destination, no hope of something better. Mankind has come to accept death as an inevitable part of life. This, we believe, is the symbolism of the descending passage and the pit. About 100 feet after entering the descending passage, there does seem to be a way of escape. It's called the ascending passage. Instead of looking down the descending passage, we can look up in the ceiling at the beginning of the ascending passage. But notice how that upward passage is plugged. Here's another view of the plug. There are actually 3 granite blocks next to each other that prohibit us from climbing up into the ascending passage. In the entire pyramid, granite can be found only here and in the uppermost chamber, called the King's Chamber. Limestone is found everywhere else. These plugs were originally hidden behind a limestone cover. The vibration from Al-Mamun's forced entry dislodged the cover, his men heard it fall, and they tunneled toward the sound. They found the granite and tunneled around it to enter the ascending passage. Experts say these plugs were built in at the time the ascending passage was constructed. After bypassing the granite plugs, we can climb into the ascending passage itself. As usual, the passage is just 4 feet high. We are again struck with the force of the architect's symbolism when we realize that the ascending passage represents the Jewish age. Like the walk of mankind in the descending passage, Israel too has stooped under the burden of sin. God told his chosen people, if they obeyed his law, they would live. For thus saith the Lord unto the house of Israel, Seek ye me, and ye shall live. But the Jewish people found they could not obey it. Their way to life was blocked by a law too hard for them to keep. And so we see that the hard granite plug represents the Jewish law given to the nation of Israel. Because of their inability to perfectly keep God's law, Israel found itself doomed with the rest of mankind. As we travel down to the pit, we now can see an opening into a narrow passage. This passage eventually climbs vertically, ending in the upper passages of the pyramid. It is called the well, probably because at times it is nearly vertical. This well was concealed for centuries. The pit and the descending passage were well known to the ancients, but the well stayed hidden until relatively recent times. The arrows identify the entrance in the right side wall. The well shaft is steep and dangerous. It would be almost impossible to ascend without a rope for assistance. The shaft opens up into a natural cave in the foundation rock called a grotto. Then the shaft continues up a short distance to meet the ascending passage. It's clear that this man-made shaft is part of the pyramid's symbolism. The architect arranged for the walls to be finished with limestone blocks. It's not just a roughly hewn tunnel added as an afterthought. The top of the well shaft connects to the side of the ascending passage. Wooden planks have been installed there to prevent anyone from falling into the opening. As we look for the meaning of the well, we must ask, how can mankind escape the downward course of sin and death, leading to the pit? Jesus saith unto him, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man cometh unto the Father but by me. There is only one way to life, and that's through the death and resurrection of Jesus. He opened up the well shaft so that man could live. The top of the well shaft and top of the ascending passage join at the base of one of the most surprising and beautiful passages in the pyramid. It's called the Grand Gallery. The passage is still narrow, but the ceiling is 28 feet high, 7 times higher than all other passages. Why was it made so high? If it were merely to allow for adequate headroom, the vertical dimension would only need to be twice as high. It must have a symbolic meaning. Those who want to go up higher toward God must walk this grand gallery. It's steep and slippery, but handholds on the side help the traveler. In looking for the significance of the Grand Gallery, we must first ask, how can anyone expect to arrive up higher? Because strait is the gate, and narrow the way which leadeth unto life, and few there be that find it. Those who willingly sacrifice their own wills to walk this narrow way arrive at the very highest chamber of the pyramid. In the Bible, the number 7 pictures divine perfection. So a passage 7 times higher pictures the perfection of spiritual knowledge and enlightenment available to those who walk this path. The top of the journey ends at the largest room of the pyramid. It's called the King's Chamber. We're at the top of the Grand Gallery and can see the entrance into the highest chamber in the pyramid. One can go into the rooms beyond only by first stooping under 2 barriers. The opening is not quite 4 feet high. There is a little anteroom just before the King's Chamber itself. We enter this anteroom by stooping under a block of granite. At this point, we're standing on something new, granite. The arrow points to a seam in the floor where the granite blocks begin. The first block is raised a 1/4 inch to attract our attention to the change. The floor, walls, and ceiling are all granite. It symbolizes a change of nature from the limestone or human condition to the divine heavenly nature. After stooping under another granite block, we enter the King's Chamber itself. The only object in the entire pyramid is this empty granite box at the back wall. It's called a coffer. There is a block of granite at the right. It was dug from the floor by Al-Mamun in his fruitless search for treasure. The coffer is empty and has no lid. It is not a coffin and the chamber is not a tomb. Remember, we're dealing with symbolism. These wall decorations in another pyramid are typical of the tombs of ancient kings. But there are no wall paintings in the King's Chamber. Al-Mamun found absolutely nothing in this pyramid, and we have no evidence anyone took the treasure before him. The King's Chamber does have something not found in any other pyramid in the world. It has air passages or vents. 2 openings extend from this room to the outside of the pyramid. This was a room for the living, not for the dead. As the highest room in the pyramid, it pictures life in heaven for those who sacrificed their lives as Christ sacrificed his. But what happens to those who do not walk the Grand Gallery? Those who know nothing of Christ and a life of sacrifice? There's a place for them. It's called the Queen's Chamber. This is the entrance to a straight horizontal passage constructed under the steep Grand Gallery. It's at the junction of the top of the ascending passage and the well. The arrows indicate the passageway straight ahead. Because it is level, it is much easier to walk than the Grand Gallery. This is a backward view of the horizontal passage. We're looking back along its length to the junction with the top of the ascending passage. This passage has a curious step. The passageway starts with the standard size, 4 feet high and 3.5 feet wide. But after traveling 6/7 the distance, you come to this step, where a person of average height can stand upright. This is another picture of mankind's walk. Today, people are constricted by the prince of this world, Satan. It's been that way for 6,000 years. But during Christ's 1,000-year kingdom, those constrictions will be removed. This is the entrance to the Queen's Chamber. There's no need to stoop here as when entering the King's Chamber. It's very easy to enter. There's only limestone in the Queen's Chamber, no granite. The exclusive use of limestone in the Queen's Chamber shows that mankind obtains life, but not life in heaven as symbolized by the granite in the King's Chamber. Limestone was used to picture human life. We have air vents in this room too, but with a curious difference. The 2 vents in this room were originally covered by 5 inches of stone. A scientist in 1872 thought the walls sounded hollow, so he broke the stone and found the vents. So we see the Queen's Chamber is also a place for the living. It pictures life on earth. There is no reason to cover the vents with stone unless you're making a symbolic picture. We believe it shows people could not live in this room until the covering stone is first taken away, when Christ establishes his kingdom on earth, for which he taught us to pray. Why do we believe the pyramid communicates God's plan and was not a tomb for an Egyptian king? First, there are no wall paintings like all the other Egyptian tombs. Second, the Egyptians always buried their kings below ground. Third, queens were always buried apart from kings. Fourth, air vents to tombs were never provided. Vent pipes are unique in the Great Pyramid. Fifth, the Grand Gallery is 7 times higher than it needs to be. Sixth, there's an unnecessary step in the passage to the Queen's Chamber. Seventh, the pit is unfinished. Everything else is carefully finished. Eighth, the ascending passage is plugged with 3 built-in granite blocks, a material found only in the King's Chamber. We should not be surprised that the message of the Great Pyramid is being conveyed to us in symbols. Consider how Jesus spoke to the people in his day. All these things spake Jesus unto the multitude in parables, and without a parable spake he not unto them. The Great Pyramid is another parable, a parable in stone, and is in complete harmony with the Bible. It was built as the first communication of God's plan to man. Here's one of the oldest man-made structures on Earth. We can't be absolutely sure who built it, when it was built, or why. But we do believe its design and construction was inspired by God, its true architect. So what have we learned? From our study of the Bible and our parable in stone, we've come to appreciate First, man's fall from perfection into sin and death. Romans 5:12. It was through one man that sin entered the world, and through sin death. And thus death pervaded the whole human race, inasmuch as all men have sinned. Second, man's rescue from death through the sacrifice and resurrection of Jesus. John 3:16 states, God loved the world so much that he gave his only Son, that everyone who has faith in him may not die, but have eternal life. Third, there is a heavenly reward for true Christians. 1 Peter 1, verses 3 and 4. Blessed be the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, who has begotten us to a lively hope, to an inheritance incorruptible, undefiled, that fadeth not away, reserved in heaven for you. Fourth, there will be a kingdom on earth for all mankind, a kingdom that will provide the opportunity for everlasting life right here on earth. Daniel 2:44 states, And in the days of these kings shall the God of heaven set up a kingdom which shall consume all other kingdoms, and it shall stand forever. Jeremiah 31:33 and 34 states, I will put my law in their inward parts, and write it in their hearts. I will be their God, and they shall be my people. And they shall teach no more every man his neighbor, and every man his brother, saying, Know the Lord? For they shall all know me, from the least of them unto the greatest of them, saith the Lord. And God shall wipe away all tears from their eyes, and there shall be no more death, neither sorrow nor crying, neither shall there be any more pain, for the former things are passed away. That's the Bible's description of the kingdom, and we thank God for it.
If you would like more information on this subject, we invite you to call or send for your free copy of the beautifully illustrated publication, The Great Pyramid, Ancient Wonder, Modern Mystery. Call toll-free 1-800-GODS-PLAN. Mention the one word pyramid to receive your free copy. Some of the subjects covered are how the Great Pyramid relates to the universe, the mathematical pi proportion, its precise geographical location, the measurement of the distance from the Earth to the Sun, and the duration of the solar year. But above all, it explains how it is truly a parable in stone, outlining the plan of God to bless all the families of the earth. Call toll-free 1-800-GODS-PLAN or write to the address on your screen. The number again, 1-800-GODS-PLAN.